Oh, baby, I don't know how you talk about all this money without using your Austin Powers voice. $11 billion. I'm Jordan Bateman, and this is episode 5 of ICBA Coffee and Construction, the news that matters to the people who build British Columbia and Alberta. Here's the news for Wednesday morning, July 8th, 2026. The Massey Tunnel, bridge, then a tunnel, still nothing in the ground. It's an $8.5 billion we told you so. So on Monday, we finally got a number out of the provincial government. BC's transportation minister now says the George Massey Tunnel replacement will cost about $8.5 billion. Sure, Jan. The 2021 budget was $4.15 billion. That's not inflation, though. It's not bad luck. It's bad policy choices and bad politics. So some quick history for anyone new to this file. In 2017, there was a funded, permitted, ready-to-build 10-lane bridge over the Fraser. Shovels were already preparing. There's pre-work going on. The contract was coming in under budget, way under budget. In fact, less than $3 billion to build the bridge. But elections have consequences. And when the NDP took power in 2017, they canceled the project in a very cynical political play to rip any credit for the bridge away from the former premier. Now, that was bad enough. But then the NDP blundered for years and years and years. They spent years studying it. They spent years consulting the Metro Vancouver mayors, the same folks who are delivering the wildly over-budget wastewater treatment centers. They chose a costlier tunnel that relied on expertise from overseas because British Columbia hasn't built a lot of these tunnels. We're great bridge builders, but why would we bother building a bridge when we could build a costlier tunnel and parachute in a bunch of European folks? They signed the deal, then they ripped up the deal when those experts said it couldn't be built at the price they wanted, all while clinging to this myth that it was a $4 billion budget. They chopped the work into smaller tenders now, it isn't really competition, it's just more delay with extra paperwork. And 9 years later, there was no crossing. Now it's double the price, and 80,000 drivers a day still idle in our worst bottleneck between Delta and Richmond. So last week, the feds came in for up to $3 billion. That's about a third of the capital cost, part of the big Canada-B.C. deal. And look, federal money for infrastructure, always welcome. But let's be clear about what happened here. David Eby and the BC NDP bungled this project so badly that taxpayers in places like Fort St. John and Kelowna and across British Columbia are now on the hook twice to bail out his bad decisions. And some of the math floating around suggests the final bill will land north of $9 billion once everything's counted and included. The devil is in the details on these sort of things. What's been cut from the scope, what's been put into funded by other projects, and what's the actual dollar figures that you're going to get from the contractors. 9 years, 0 lanes, double the price. Now look, for contractors, here's the takeaway. This thing's finally going to be tendered in earnest, hopefully. We've heard that before. But it will be one of the biggest jobs in BC. Just don't build your whole 5-year financial plan around an NDP schedule. All right, pipelines. So while the rest of us were firing up the barbecue, Ottawa, Alberta, and BC politicians dropped the biggest project news in a decade. Alberta Premier Daniel Smith and Prime Minister Mark Carney stood together in Calgary and unveiled the West Coast Oil Pipeline, 1 million barrels a day from Bruderheim, northeast of Edmonton, down a southern corridor beside the existing Trans Mountain line to a brand new export terminal planned for Roberts Bank in Delta. Trans Mountain Corporation and Pembina Pipeline are the partners. Price tag, $35 to $44 billion. Some of these numbers are just mind-boggling, hey? National interest listing expected by October 1st. Construction could start as early as September 2027. Everyone knock wood. And at its peak, this thing could employ about 140,000 people. We're not talking small jobs. We're talking about real jobs, long-term jobs, real paychecks in towns that desperately need it along the route. Now, David Eby's reaction. He promised that he wouldn't fight it. I don't expect me or my members of my government caucus to say we like the project, but they won't fight it in court. It took us how many years to get the NDP to actually realize that they don't have any court options. We learned that in the first Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project. But Carney wants to get to yes. Danielle Smith wants to get to yes. Carrie Lynn Finley, BC Conservative opposition leader, she wants to get to yes. Eby, he doesn't want to get to yes, but he doesn't want to sue us either. So I guess that's progress. Good old Dave Eby just can't bring himself to actually get on board a national building project. Now, one caution flag from the coverage. Analysts note that the private sector isn't ready to carry this alone yet. And who can blame them? There's so much risk involved, especially when you have all these different governments, Indigenous groups along the line, private property owners, all these things still have to be dealt with. And that's why Trans Mountain, a Crown corporation, is anchoring it. Builders should watch who's actually writing checks when the national interest designation finally lands this fall, hopefully lands this fall. After all, MOUs don't pour concrete. Final investment decisions start the concrete pours. All right. This is a little bit of a long one, but I was away for a week. The $20 billion BC deal. As part of this whole thing, and I guess to buy off EB from dragging needlessly and futilely dragging this through court, Carney and EB signed a Canada-B.C. cooperative prosperity agreement. It's about $20 billion in federal commitments. Ottawa says will catalyze more than $200 billion in investment. What's in it for the people who build things? 4 LNG projects have been put on the fast track, including LNG Canada Phase 2 in Kitimat, Silisms, Cedar LNG, and wood fiber in Squamish. Now, some of those are already underway. Wood fiber, for example. LNG Canada Phase 1 is already open. Other projects are waiting for final investment decisions. These aren't brand new projects that we didn't know about, but at least they're going to get national project designation, which hopefully will help them cut through some red tape. Wouldn't it be great if we could if all of our contributions to the economy would be recognized as national contributions, and then that way we could all cut through the red tape, or maybe just cut the red tape. But I digress. The Red Chris mine expansion in the Northwest, about $500 million aimed at boosting national copper production. The North Coast transmission line to power all of it. Again, there are cheaper ways to get electricity to some of these places. It's called natural gas, and creating power plants there, but the North Coast transmission line has been a much-needed project and wanted project for a long time. And a $10 billion upgrade to the Roberts Bank container terminal in Delta. That's the one that when you're getting on the BC ferries at Tsawwassen, you see it. You see it jutting out to your right. Now, the catch. The North Coast tanker ban stays. On almost everything in this deal is an acceleration promise, not a permit. We've seen and heard about being streamlined before, but the test for builders and investors and for the First Nations partners in these projects is certainty. Announcements are nice. Final investment decisions and notices to proceed are way better. And finally, one that will affect your bottom line, if not in 2027, then 2028 and beyond. WorkSafeBC. New this week from our chief economist, Jock Finlinson. You can read his work at icba.ca/economics. WorkSafeBC is storing up trouble, and every employer in BC should read his piece. So here's the picture. I've been talking about this for quite some time, and I was really happy when Jock weighed in with a more economic, rigorous view of the whole issue, but we've got problems at WorkSafe. So WorkSafe will say your WorkSafe premiums have been frozen at $1.55 per $100 of payroll for about 9 straight years. Great. That sounds great. I would point out that everyone's safety record has gotten far better in that time. And usually when your safety record gets better, insurance rates drop. And in fact, in other provinces, we've seen many of them cut their rates. Being frozen may sound good. It actually is failing in the competitive test against other provinces. But okay, sure, they've been frozen for 9 years. But here's why it can't last. Claims costs jumped 22% in just 2 years, $3.6 billion last year. And that's about $650 million more than the year before. Jordan, you're saying, how can that be? You just told me that we're getting safer. The NDP and their NDP-appointed board have made some very but expensive ideological decisions to add a whole bunch more things into WorkSafe's program, and that has cost a lot more money. What it means is that in insurance, you want to have enough money in the bank to pay out a certain percentage of a possible claim. So the funding cushion is what we call 130%. That's really the target. But many companies run higher than that. WorkSafe's funding cushion used to be about 155%. Now it's slipped to below 140% for the first time since 2016. And 14% of all claims now involve chronic pain and psychological distress, up from 10% in 2019. And these are routinely approved with limited due diligence on whether they actually started at work. We're seeing more and more cases where there are mental health claims being put in. We understand that. Obviously, we support ICBA Wellness, award-winning mental health program. We support making sure people get help. But you put these claims in, And there's no diagnosis as to the cause of it. Maybe your marriage is breaking up. Maybe you've had a tragedy at home. Maybe something has happened with a brother or a friend. Nothing to do with work. They're dumping the cost on employers. That isn't sustainable. Premium hikes are all but inevitable. That's Jock's takeaway. Possibly starting as soon as 2027. I'm actually going into a meeting with the Employers Forum next week where we'll get the first look at rates. I bet they hold it. The last thing they want to do is raise it, but we'll see. But WorkSafe's board, they're not tapping the brakes. They're actually looking at even richer benefits and a whole new psychological health and safety regulation, which will essentially codify what's been going on for a while already. And that's basically pinning the blame or the cost for every mental health issue in the province on employers rather than actually looking at what might be causing it. So this is tough. And if you're a company with employees, that's a payroll tax that you're going to have to deal with. So just keep that in the back of your mind. WorkSafeBC claims will go up. We've done a lot of work on this. They eliminated their fraud investigation unit. We broke that story. We've been talking about these financial things for a long time. They've been trying to get from that 155%. They want to be around 130% funding. The problem is they're falling so fast now and adding so many more costs that if you watch For All Mankind, what they're going to do is they're going to blow right by. They're going to skip off the atmosphere of the planet and burn up, and it's going to be us who pay the bill. Okay, there you go. Some good news, some bad news. It's British Columbia in a nutshell these days, ain't it? For the full analysis, again, subscribe to ICBA Economics, icba.ca/economics. All right. That's the show for today. We'll be here Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. If this was useful, please subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform and send it to one person who builds for a living. I'm Jordan Bateman. This was ICBA Coffee and Construction. Now, let's all go pour something.